25th meeting of the Norwich Select Board. As part of that, I have to read this remote public meeting script. So as chair of the Norwich Select Board, I find that due to this state of emergency declared by Governor Scott as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to Addendum 6 to Executive Order 01-20 and Act 92, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. In accordance with Act 92, there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the temporary amendments to the open meeting law, I confirm that we are providing public access via Zoom, telephone, and video conferencing. All votes will be roll call votes. Roger will go into how to let the board know that you wish to speak.
Sure.
With that, I'm going to attest that all the select board members are here. Myself, Claudia Brochu, the chair, Mary Layton, Roger Arnold, vice chair, and our Zoom guru, John Langus and Rob Gear.
And there's Herb, who just may have spun around in his seat. So just quickly, I think everyone here is well versed. If you're on the phone, push *9, and that will alert me that you would like to speak, and I will unmute you. If you are on Zoom, the way to raise your hand virtually is you would click on participants in the bottom of your screen, and then there's a button there that says raise hand, and that will alert me, right? So I think that is it. I think everyone here is well versed. So yeah.
Okay, so at 6:34, we're going to move or look to the agenda. Is there any agenda item that any board member would wish to defer, add, delete, shift in location? I see a collective no from the select board members. That moves us on to public and select board comments. I'm going to go first with select board comments. Any select board member wishing to make a public comment? Roger has one.
Yes, so just really quickly, I have been contacted by several, so more than 2, but less than 7 members of our community about Juneteenth. They were inspired by the town of Hartford's declaration of Juneteenth and have asked that if this is something that Norwich can look to, and that if this governing body can lead the way. The commitments, the personal or the individual commitments that I made to these folks is one that I'll just put into this space, which is absolutely that it is something we should look to do. It's something that may very well lead up to a larger kind of initiative or a larger kind of project or work in the town of Norwich. I will begin by reaching out to Alicia Barrow of the Hartford Select Board to ask how it came about in her thinking as one of the spearheaders in there, and then and how we may wish to adapt it, what they've learned. And yes, so I think it's something that we might want to talk about during a budget season for public funds to support that kind of project. It's something that we may want to think of as the town on a programmatic level that may well result in an ad hoc committee. So I just wanted to say that I had conversations about all the options as I saw them. I think it's something that needs to be led by the community because we are an all-white board, right? And this is something that should be community-led, particularly with members of a BIPOC community. So that's what I said. Sorry, that took a while, but yeah. Thanks.
Any other select board comments? Moving on to public comments. I know Ernie had 1 or 2. So I would ask that if the members of the public speak, they state their name and their locatable address.
Yep. Ready?
Sure, go right ahead.
Ernie Ciccatelli, 49 Tigertown Road. Norwich, Vermont. First question I have is, because it's not clear to me when I look at the agenda, is on the item 8, which has to do with the culvert on Route 132. I want to make some comments, but I also don't want to really make or make too much out of it if there's not going to be a vote tonight. I just have a couple of questions. But what I don't know is it going to be a vote on it tonight, or is it just absolutely just an informational thing from the town manager?
There is nothing that I know of that we have to vote on tonight, but I will defer to, if there were to be a vote, again, as Roger stated, there should be something on the agenda that states we would have a vote. We spent a couple of meetings, 2 or 3 previous meetings discussing that 132 culvert. But I believe it is just an update from Herb.
Okay, then I'll just ask my questions. The first question I wanted to know is, because it's not in any of that package. I mean, that looks like, well, let me ask this question. Is that a bunch of materials from Stantec considered a quote for the job?
I'm deferring to Herb on that one.
So I don't know if you were at the last meeting, Ernie, but the board authorized me to use a portion of our purchasing policy to, with regard to the box culvert, and due to the time and trying in the interest of saving money for the town, to proceed with utilizing Stantec due to the qualifications that they'd already proven through a very similar project, which was the Tigertown culverts. The board granted that at the last meeting. Then I proceeded to do is to, according to the purchasing policy, is to negotiate a contract thereafter. And the information that's in the packet is the result of Larry working with Stantec to come up with the project cost and what would essentially be a contract to be the engineering firm for that, for the scoping, planning, permitting type thing for the 132 box culvert near Bowen Hill Road. We're in the middle of seeing if we're going to shift some Chapel Hill monies that we're getting through a V-Trans grant from Chapel Hill over to that particular project. So the hope is that that's the major source of funding. When we get to the point where we need to proceed with that, and I will then come back to the board to say that we did get the grant and that we can deal with it. If I do not get the ability to shift the grant over or get a separate grant from a V-Trans Structures grant to do the engineering stuff, then I'll come back to the board and we'll talk about a source of revenue at that point.
Okay. First of all, let me make it clear that I'm not opposing replacing the bridge or anything like that. That's not what my problem is. It's just that I'm not clear on how hiring companies without competitive bids is a good idea. I'm not sure why. I don't know what the explanation is for why we're not using competitive bidding in the town.
Essentially, this is a provision. We do require the formal bidding process. However, there is a provision under the formal bidding process of the town's master financial policy for purchasing that allows for this kind of a situation, that due to the constraints of time and funding, that we actually have gone through a formal bidding process with regard to the technical merit of this engineer and their qualifications. And therefore, because therefore the cost stuff becomes secondary to the need for the professional qualifications.
Okay. So if these guys are 2 or 3 times the price of someone of, let's say, Du Bois and King. But because you've worked with them, that would be why they'd be hired? Because you've worked with them and they've been successful?
That's a particular part of it. The other is that in order to, probably what we have to do is reduce Route 132 down to one lane, which requires signals. In order to get the rental signals that we need right now, the best estimate that we have is $31,000 every 6 months just for the traffic lights. So the rationale, a lot of the rationale is to try to get this project going so that we spend as little money for the accessories, if you will, than for the project cost itself. So we think that in the grand scheme of things, the cost benefit analysis is better to proceed with the engineering aspect of things as using the exception provision in the purchasing policy, because we think in the long run it will save the town money than to go out with the formal bidding of the engineer, waiting that time frame, and potentially spending $31,000 to $60,000 before we can even get to the project itself.
So I'm going to interrupt right here because we had 2 to 3 meetings that dealt with the 132 culvert, and I don't want to shut you off, Ernie, but I would recommend that you connect with Herb.
Okay, but I just want to, if you don't mind, I just want to make one comment. I observed that tonight's materials list, it looks like it's a quotation, and it implies that this project is going to be funded on July 2nd and work will start on July 6th. There are numerous, there's not a single dollar sign anywhere in the document, but there are quotations based on, the quote appears to say this is the number of hours it's going to take. But it doesn't tell us, it doesn't tell you or me how much this project's going to cost. And from what I know of Stantec, and I did a little research, they are competent. I'm not arguing that, but they are also quite expensive as mega corporations, which they are. So
And
that's my concern.
okay. And John, you had a comment?
Yeah, and I think that that's a fair comment. I had the same observation, actually. I do think that when we're not doing a bid because of an urgency matter, it's all the more important that we know going in as clearly as we can what the cost of that is going to be. And I would hope, without that being a formal requirement of that provision, that Larry's going to look at that quote and it's going to pass some sort of smell test, that he's going to, so there's 2 ways to do these, right? You do a bid, which substitutes for a negotiation because they sort of, are competing with each other, or you have to negotiate with the person if you're not going to do a bid. So I would hope that we're not just saying, golly, this is an emergency, so we really need you to do this. Send us a bill when you're done. We should know the cost of this, and we should negotiate that, I think, rather than just accepting what they tell us is the.
I will say that if this is the same engineering company that did the $300,000 conduit on Tiger Town Road, they're pretty expensive. And I don't know at all what size of culvert this is or anything like that. There's no quotation at all.
So there is, hopefully it made it in, but in terms of the scanning, I gave the Stantec thing as part of the revised packet.
I looked at
And in it, it had, for their total project cost, they had $27,178. And then they also had some direct expenses of $642. So
Can you tell me what page that was?
It was,
I was looking.
It was the last 2 pages of that June 18 letter from them. And I can tell you the amount again. It had the letter, and then it had a task labor hour schedule as part of it. So there was a total of 233 task hours. And then the total project cost that they provided on the cost schedule was $27,178. And then the last sheet was a direct expense, which was $642. Did it not get scanned? I apologize, because I did scan the letter for the addendum in the packet.
It's in.
I'm just looking now. I may have missed it, and that may be my bad.
And I I emailed you earlier back, Linus, but you probably didn't see my email, but,
Oh,
So
yeah,
I-
I didn't see that yet.
okay.
I'm looking for it now too, but let's move on and hopefully we can get that information in the
Yep.
by the town manager update.
Yep, but
Yeah.
just, if I may, Madam Chair, just again, $27,178, that's for that particular engineering aspect of things. The culvert itself would still be going out to the bidding process once we understand what we need. So it's not going to be Stantec as the contractor as well.
And I definitely agree with the basic point that at that sort of level of a contract, if we're spending more than the contract per month for each month of delay, I agree that there's some flexibility in there too. Maybe we pay a premium for that actual work, but if we save an extra $30,000 in delay money, then that's worth doing that. So I agree with that analysis for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comments?
Cheryl had her hand up.
Who does?
Cheryl Lindbergh?
Cheryl, go ahead.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You are.
Thank you. Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road. I would just like to state on behalf of the Board of Listers that we did file the abstract last Wednesday, June 17th, and that we are in a 2-week period waiting for any grievances that will be submitted to us, that the abstract at 6/17 of 2020 or June 17th, the municipal grand list is $790,695,500 as our gross grand list. Divided by 100 becomes 7,906,955. That's an increase over the last grand list, the final one, of $4,246,000. We will be hearing grievances next Wednesday and determining any decisions on those grievances, and then filing the final grand list shortly thereafter. Wanted to let everybody know. Is that me?
I don't know.
I think it was Sue in our downtown.
Okay. Phew.
Not paying attention.
It's okay.
So we've posted this as required by statute, state statute and all, but it never hurts to have a public comment in case anybody's listening or people listen to this or read the minutes to let them know that their grievance needs to be submitted before next Wednesday, July 1st at 4:30 p.m.
Thank you, Cheryl. Any other comments? I'm looking to Roger.
No,
No?
sorry. Nope, not that I see. No hands.
Okay, then moving on to number 3, the consent agenda. There's someone willing to make a motion?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
So the motion is made by Mary, seconded by John, and anything anyone wants to pull?
Well, I don't want to linger on the consent agenda too much, but I kind of wanted to sort of get a head nod about the letter from Pam Smith. If it was addressed to us, but I accept Herb's response as an adequate one. And then also Nick Krems had a letter, which I don't know if I want to go too deep into, but I do think this idea of like a committee that is made up of, I would think we should discuss it a little bit. So I would like to get a consensus on whether or not we agree that Herb's response was adequate for Pam Smith's letter. I want to talk a little bit about the Nick Krems letter, about the makeup of the subcommittee, the trail subcommittee. And then also I want to know how the Beth Pierce's loan program comes into play in our later discussion. So I guess those are the 3 things. But I know that that's probably not a popular decision as I look to John has his hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm not.
Okay.
I would just say that on the first one, on the Pam thing, I thought that Herb's response was good for the moment. Pam is now our newest member of the Finance Committee. So personally, I think that these sort of comments are exactly what we want to get from the Finance Committee, and those should come through the Finance Committee. It will defeat the purpose of having that committee, I think, if we start getting individual email policy discussion requests from individual members when they're specifically organ set up for that discussion.
Yeah.
And I also want to pull the Nick letter about the Trails Committee. I don't want to discuss it tonight. I want to pull it, acknowledge that we received it, and then I want to probably, I have a difference of opinion, and I want it to be vetted by probably maybe VLCT to see if the interpretation of the Trails Committee is the correct one. I don't know for sure.
Sounds like you kind of want to discuss it.
No, I don't want to discuss it. I just,
I don't want to
well,
either. But I think we should discuss it. We have to.
okay,
No? If I may, Madam Chair.
sure.
Okay.
Mary?
I'd like to say that I also thought that Herb's response to Pam was adequate, and I feel fine discussing the Nick Crims letter briefly.
So are you willing to addend, or actually we don't have to. So there was a motion made by Mary, seconded by John. We're pulling the Nick letter. I was also okay with Herb's response to Pam. Did you want to, Roger, are you
So we
okay?
don't need to pull the Pam letter then, do we? Or
No.
except we've already, okay.
Oh, go ahead. Herb has his hand up.
Just a suggestion is that if you just pass the consent agenda as is, but for a future agenda item, make Nick Krem's letter for a future agenda item, that might deal with it tonight.
That kind of makes it clean. Is that okay with everybody?
It
Yes.
is. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank
And
you.
Herb.
Thank you, Herb. So we have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Mary?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
And Brochu's a yes. I did have one question. No, never mind. So now we'll be moving on to appointments to the open positions. We did get a very late email from Miranda about an applicant for Conservation Commission. I have her name.
Courtney?
Courtney.
Yep.
Hello.
But we will go through as they're listed. The first one is up is the Lister appointment. This is an interim appointment until August 11th, which is the date of the next town election. So is there a motion to appoint Doug Wilberding to the Board of Listers for a term to expire on August 11th, 2020, which is the date of the next town election?
I so move.
Is there a second? Moved by Mary,
Second.
seconded by Rob.
Mhm.
And now I'd like to open this to Doug to get a couple of comments from him about why he's interested in running. Questions, and then that will be followed by questions from the board.
Okay. Thanks, you guys. Hope you're doing well. I know this assignment is only for 47 days, and I'm on the ballot already for the August 11th vote. I'd really like to help Cheryl and Pam here. They have a lot of work going on, and I'd like to add my expertise. You kind of saw my resume and my background. This is essentially what I do every day. And I've done a lot of real estate transactions in my career, about 5 billion in transactions, and I work on about $250 million at a time. Analyze real estate and their values in all markets, all asset classes. pretty consistently, and I'm a lifelong resident of Norwich. So I would love your support.
Any questions from the board? Go ahead, John.
Doug, I've got a couple of questions. So how do you understand the role of the lister to be?
Well, I picked up the manual, and it's pretty detailed. And it's essentially an independent body, but it works, it kind of collaborates with the select board from time to time. They have to analyze real estate as it's kind of in an independent view based on market value.
Okay.
The state offers education classes every April as well.
Okay. I would view the lister's office as possibly the most intimately connected with our citizens. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a couple other committees that are pretty in touch with the residents, but I think if it's affecting someone's home value, you really get to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you feel comfortable with that sort of level of intimacy with your fellow townspeople?
Absolutely.
Is there anyone where that would not be the case?
If there were, I would exempt myself from it. If I had a conflict or somebody that I had an issue with, I would absolutely pull myself out of it.
Okay. Sorry, did you want to ask some questions, Mary? I thought I saw you raise your hand. I don't want to monopolize things here.
I was just wondering, Doug seems to have a lot of experience. Well, first of all, I'm glad he wants to serve the town. I'll just say that. He's been frustrated in that, and I think it would be great if he could serve in some way. But also just that it seems like the scale of what Doug has been working with, an urban environment is very different from a small town. So just, you know, I think some adjustment will need to be made. And also just of thinking about how eccentric some of the properties are, and that some of the valuation is very, I would guess you would say, interpretive, that the comparables are not always easy. So, you know, there's sort of a lot of subjective judgment that I think would be hard.
That's totally fair. I'll give you a good example of that, and I appreciate those thoughts. David Leatherwood has a house on the market right now. I know David from my real estate career, and he has a very significant hotel portfolio, limited service hotel portfolio, owns most of the hotels in Lebanon, but hotels nationally. His house is unique, 4.7 million on the river. It's one of a kind in the town. How do you value that? It's very, very unique. As far as residential experience, I've been a residential broker for about 25 years in 3 states. I did a scattered site affordable housing real estate fund for a nonprofit in DC, which had a couple thousand single family homes. So I have touched single family homes in my career, as well as kind of institutional investments.
Okay, thank you.
So I have no issue at all with your qualifications, Doug. Obviously, you're incredibly qualified for this sort of thing and do it for a living. My concern is really this one about the interpersonal aspects of this position and some of the things that you've said in the past, done in the past within our town, that make me question whether you have the right temperament for something that's that intimate. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Sure. I mean, I think this is an assignment that you're being asked to approve for 47 days. The town will speak on August 11th. And I think most people know me. They understand that while you may disagree with some things that I say or do, you know that I'm a real and honest person. If there's a conflict, I will step away from it. And I'm the first to voice that if somebody else has a conflict, they should step away from something. Sometimes that's hard for people to understand or appreciate. Other people get it. And I understand that. But I do want to serve my town. I'm a lifelong, I want to help out.
And I would also like to point out he would be one of 3 with a professional assessor. So that's my 2 cents. Any other comments from the board?
No.
I just heard a bang. Sorry, I'm just kind of just a tad distracted there. Okay, so we will roll call vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Yes.
Roger?
No.
John?
No.
Rob?
Yes.
And Claudette's a yes. So thank you, Doug.
Thank you, guys.
Our next appointment, is there a motion to appoint Sue Pittiger to the Development Review Board for the remainder of an unexpired term to expire on April 30th, 2021? And I would just note that Sue currently right now is an alternate and stepping into a non-alternate position. Is anyone willing to make that motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So the motion's made by John, seconded by Rob, and I see Sue is sitting, it looks like on her porch.
Aren't I lucky?
You are.
Okay, I apologize for not being muted properly when that truck went through. Do you want me to speak or
You can if you
identify
like.
myself?
You can if you like. I think you
Okay.
were here a couple of weeks ago, just saying pretty much what, because I think we just reappointed you as the alternate, did we not?
Yes, but I was appointed as the alternate at least 3 years ago. And I might have been reappointed as an alternate. We were supposed to be away. And of course we weren't. At any rate, I'm here now to seek the permanent position, the non-alternate, which I guess you'd call the regular
Okay.
position.
Any questions from the board? Seeing none, I'm going to roll call. Mary, how do you vote?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
And Claudette's a yes.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you, Sue.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And now I hate to tell you, I hate these Zoom things. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm leaving the meeting now. Sorry, I know all you are working. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay, is there a, moving on to our next appointment, is there a motion to appoint Robert Johnson to the Recreation Council for a 3-year term to expire on March 31st, 2020?
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by John, seconded by Rob. And I see Rob Johnson is in our audience. Rob, can you just introduce yourself, locatable address, say why you, just a few words if you want.
Sure. Yep. I'm on 47 Hawk Pine. I've been a part of the rec council. I have now a 4th grader, and I've been the soccer coach since kindergarten. And I'm just really involved in sports and outdoors in the community. So.
My condolences for your loss of sports these last 3 months.
That's been tough, but luckily we live in Vermont where we can go. So.
Any questions from the board? Hearing none, we will vote. Mary, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Roger?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
And Brochu's a yes, with thanks to Rob for joining the Rec Council. I can't understand why nobody wants to hang out with us for the rest of the night. But that's okay. The next is someone's going to have to help me with the language because I'm not sure of the term for Courtney. Is there a motion to appoint Courtney Dragoff, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, to the Conservation Commission for a term
Do you know
that
the term?
expires? Does anybody know?
Herb, do you know the term of that?
Sorry, yes, it's March 31st, 2024.
To a term that will expire March
31st.
31st, 2024.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Or Rob.
Rob was on a roll, but
Yeah.
sorry, Rob. Roger got there first. So motion made by John, seconded by Roger. Courtney, welcome. Please introduce yourself. I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
What's the volume?
Be closer or at the
Or be
volume.
closer, yeah, or speak louder. Now you are muted for sure. Still can't hear you, no.
It's okay.
Oh my.
Maybe you got a rotten mic?
Use a chat.
Yeah.
Or you can join by telephone.
Yeah.
We can
Oh,
see.
in that case, I hear you. I
Oh,
hear
you
you.
can?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, worked all week. Hello, I lived in Norwich for about 5 years and moved to Hanover a little over a year ago, and now am back. So I had to give up my seat when I moved, and I'm hoping to join the Conservation Commission again. I'm currently living at 254 Main Street with Jenny Anderson at St. Barnabas, and plan to stay in Norwich. I'm helping out on the Trails Committee, and I work for the Hanover Conservancy during the day. So I have a lot of experience with local trails and land management, and I'm just looking to learn from the other people on the commission and help out where I can.
Awesome.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know. You know what side of the river to be on. Any questions from the board? Seeing none, we will call a vote. Mary?
I vote yes.
Roger?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
And Brochu's a yes. And with great thanks to Courtney for moving back to Vermont and joining the Conservation Commission.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Courtney?
Madam Chair,
Yes, John.
I apologize, but I need to take my leave now that we've done with the citizen portion here and return to my family who's trying to get a little away time this week.
Thank you for attending what you have. So
All right, thanks, everyone.
have a good rest of your vacation.
We will.
Okay, next item on the agenda is special town meeting warning with articles. And I don't know, Herb, were there any further submissions? Do you know, did you hear from Bonnie?
Yes, so first of all, her husband's doing well in the hospital, coming out of recovery.
Didn't know he was in the hospital, but
Right, and so he had a little procedure done, I guess, so he's good. But no petitions came in either by foot or by email as of 5:04 today. So all you have to deal with is the reconsideration vote, or basically the special meeting warrant as presented to you in the packet.
okay. And so since Bonnie, I wanted to have, we'll have to push this to the next agenda, but I will formally invite Bonnie because I don't know what the plan is for the town meeting. Is it going to be mail-in only? Will there be, all of those questions? Will there be drive-up voting? Will there be an open polling place? Will it be all write-in? I mean, all mail-in? So but that's kind of stuff we're going to need to decide quite quickly. So.
Right, and that's why the warning is written the way that it is, because there still is some uncertainty from that standpoint. She's going to seriously try to do a mailer or what have you to get people to ask for ballots, or she may do a mail-out ballot system. And then they are seriously considering a drive-through polling location as well. That would be up at the transfer station, because there's a logical sort of U-shape in and out type of thing. And she does have, the legislature has granted a temporary reprieve from having to have a vote on moving a location like that. It would simply be probably an act of select board, or she might be able to do it with her, what is that, the Board of Civil Authority.
Mary has her hand up, Claudette. You were coughing.
Is it okay?
Go ahead, Mary.
I noticed I did request an absentee ballot for the first time, never done it before. And, I know that Bonnie had sent out earlier on the listserv just a kind of a reminder to make sure that you're on the, I guess it's a state checklist, that you are registered with the Secretary of State's office, not just on the town. Because I was registered so long ago in this town that through various iterations of how they update it, I was not recognized. So, you know, I think it's worth it if people are thinking about it, just to make sure that they know whether, you know, they know the procedure ahead of time, not do it at the last minute. So if for instance, if Bonnie put out another notice like that, I think that would be helpful.
I think too, I think I saw in that message, and I meant, you know, maybe we shouldn't be discussing this because we can't get confirmation one way or another, but I noticed I requested through the Secretary of State the Article 8 ballot in addition to the other ballot, in addition to the primary. But then I noticed that the message said that I would not be getting that ballot as an absentee ballot. She specifically said that. But yet I think it was written in a way where if you had previously requested an absentee ballot, you would be getting it. So I think the language was, I don't think it was confusing. I was confused by the language. So
I think we could use a clarification. And also, there must be more than one ballot, because there's town business, and then there's the
state.
So,
They're the primary.
yeah. So yeah,
The primary is separate from your special meeting.
Hold on. Herb, I think you were talking over Mary.
So I just muted you, Mary, just so, because I think we're getting some feedback from you. So maybe when you're not speaking, if you could mute yourself. So I'm going to do that. Go ahead, Herb.
Sorry, I apologize, Mary. It wasn't meaning to. I'm just saying that it is essentially two different votes. The primary is separate. Its ballot is separate from what's effectively your special town meeting ballot. What will happen is you'll have your two ballots, one for the primary, and then you'll actually get a piece of paper for essentially the single article that you're going to vote on, which is the reconsideration. And those, if you get an absentee ballot, it'll come in probably one envelope, but there'll be two envelopes inside that. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, Rob?
I found the clarification about the way the ballots are counted. Was very useful, having counted ballots for a number of years. That if the threshold of write-ins is below the winning vote, and the totals match up with the total number of people voted, there won't need to be a hand count afterwards. And that's given the circumstances, that's very good to know.
Yeah, as one who has counted ballots as well. So, okay. So is there somebody willing to make a motion about the town meeting warning?
I'll try my first.
Sure.
I move to approve the August 11, 2020 special town meeting warning as presented in the meeting packet as submitted by 5 p.m. today, June 25th, 2020, the deadline.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Just clarity, Madam Chair. You can cut that motion short when at the period should be meeting packet. So you don't have to include any of the other, the bracketed, sorry, Rob, you.
Oh, okay. I
have the
skipped
bracketed
over, yeah.
stuff. Yep, sorry.
Rob, are you willing to amend that motion?
I will. I would like to amend my amendment to say, I move to approve the August 11th, 2020 town meeting warning as presented in the meeting packet.
And bless you, Roger.
I second that. We need it.
Bad, bad, bad. You sneezed into your hand and then touched your face.
Yeah.
So, any further discussion? Sorry, the nurse, whatever. So we'll roll call. Mary?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Brochu's the yes. And sorry, I apologize, Roger. I shouldn't have called you out on that. So.
Good.
All right. Year-to-date revenue expense report. Turning it over to Herb. The information was in our packet, and then there was another one in our addendum.
Yes.
Um,
It was exactly the same thing. But
minus some notes, or with some notes, I think.
yeah, it's just the only difference from that was in the addendum was that pages 2 and 15 had my handwritten notes on it, which you folks like to see the normalized version of it. And by the time this came out last Friday, I wasn't able to pull stuff to get to review it, first of all, and to go through it. So the addendum is exactly the same as what was in the original packet. Just I would highlight on page 2, you can see generally where we're at with regard to the revenues, which is essentially 100% of budget, which is good. And then on page 15, you'll see that expenses, if we normalize it, you're at basically 88% of budget, which for the through 11 months of the 12-month year. So that's pretty good from that standpoint. And then I told you this at the last meeting, but at the sake of hopefully not confusing you, we put the balance sheet in here, which took you through May. But you remember at the last meeting, I had given you a balance sheet to date at that point, just to give you an update, because we had some discussion on school stuff and cash flow. So what was in your packet is actually 10 days or so before what you received already. Tried to highlight at the top. Hopefully it didn't confuse folks, but this balance sheet is what I would normally give you through the 11 months. If there's any confusion on that, I can call it out again, but basically the balance sheet through 11 months is showing that we're doing well. But you should have already have known that based on the balance sheet I gave you at the last meeting for a whole different topic. Questions on this? Okay.
Linda Cook has her hand up, Claudette.
Go ahead, Linda.
Hi, on the addendum part of the package on page 12, under capital expenditures, designated fund equipment, the budget was for $40,000. What was actually spent was $43,753.61. When the designated fund doesn't have enough money, where would the additional money come from?
So there are a couple of these in the budget, which I'm working on, Becky, to make a journal entry correction, because these line items cannot, I repeat, cannot exceed the budgeted line item, because these are new appropriations. So what has happened in a couple of these instances is that through the transfer of either using a designated fund, Becky has not understood how this works. So it's only in these particular areas. I've been working on her to make the journal entries so that eventually that line item will only show $40,000, and the amount that's there is either related to a specific designated fund allocation that you already approved through a separate warrant, and she just accounted for it differently, or there's a little bit of a difference in another situation where the actual transfer of monies going out and in through some equipment went through that line item instead of transferring in and out of the actual designated fund, which was the source of funding. So that's something that I highlighted in a previous monthly report. I'm just trying to get the everything that Becky's trying to do for the year end and getting ready for that has been a little bit of a stumbling block, but I'm glad you pointed that out again, Linda.
All right, thank you, Herb.
So I think actually that's a really good question, and I didn't, I didn't raise it because I meant to ask you later, Herb, because I suspected it was because of these things that you've already presented to us. So like, what would be, so I guess I'll ask directly. So what would be a reasonable amount of time? Should we always just be asking, should we just?
No, it's always good to ask the question. If my excuse right now is that I essentially have 2 vacant positions in the finance office with someone that's handling stuff. This is the type of thing that I would expect to be taken care of within a matter of 24 hours.
Okay, so that's great. Because me too, but I didn't want to make it a thing, PM, right?
Well, it's a level of annoyance on my part. It's there. I have it noted, and certainly the ultimate goal is that this is all taken care of before year end, so that we don't have to deal with this. And this is similar to a question that Claudette had earlier in the year with regard to petroleum products, which we did get fixed. But again, you remember that took a little time. This again is taking some time. And I think a piece of it is, it's really an understanding of how the designated fund line items work. And it's hard for others to understand that this is a new appropriation, that the expenditure is simply a form of raising revenue for the actual designated fund where the transactions literally occur, not in these line items.
Okay.
So if we're still paying Cynthia Stoddard, which we are, because I believe she is, she meets with Becky seemingly relatively regularly. I'm just, has there been direction to correct this? And I guess I'm wondering why it's still taken this time to get it corrected with two hired, a NIMRIC pro and
Cynthia is in the know, and there's a list of items that there's a form of training that's going on and items that we're picking up on. Cynthia is really focused on the pre-audit and getting the information ready for that. Cynthia, essentially the contract that we have is over what did we call it? The bulk agreement essentially expired quite some time ago. So we're basically doing time and materials with them at this point. So I'm specifically using Cynthia where I think the resources need to be spent most, which is again toward the pre-audit. And then when we can do the education, doing that. This is one of the items that is it's on the list, and it's a function of catch up, and it's not unnoticed by me from that standpoint. It's just getting through to see those things done. That's why I said normally in the finance office that we have, it would be done in less than 24 hours. So it's frustrating on my part as well. And, as a result of tonight's discussion as well, it's going to be revisiting that with Becky tomorrow.
Cheryl Lindberg and Pam Smith have their hands up. So Cheryl was first, Claudette.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
Am I unmuted? All right.
Yes.
Okay. So just a couple thoughts and maybe a question. Balance sheets are supposed to be done at month end. That's a very common time to have a snapshot of a business. So balance sheets should be done at month end, and that would be my suggestion going forward. With that said, I've been looking at the period 11 May end of month balance sheet, and a couple of thoughts. Herb, I don't know whether or not you have closed out the petty cash account in the town based on financial policies or not. I thought that may have been the case.
Yes.
If so, on the balance sheet at May, they're still showing as $100 petty cash accounts throughout the town, which are just a journal entry that need to be made.
Yep.
Secondly, when you're looking at assets, if there's a negative, that means it's the opposite of what you want. On page 2 of the May, period 11 May balance sheet, we have a negative due to, due from of 2,188,000, which implies to me that those are dollars owed back to the different designated funds, and that those dollars need to be filling those other buckets, or it's possible that on that.
That's the school district, Cheryl.
Yeah, I was going to say on that same page under the liabilities, there's the school district liability for 2 million. Typically, the due to, due froms are within the town's different fund balances. For instance, when Roberta borrowed from the designated funds to front the money to pay for FEMA expenses, there's a due to, due from established. The liability for the school district is separately, shown on this balance sheet. So it would be my thinking that that due to, due from is not the school district, that it's what's going on between the designated funds and the general fund. Just some thoughts, just some observations. I believe that the school liability has been paid down since the May 31st balance sheet, and that was happening in June. So that number would be a lot smaller, and our cash number would be a bit smaller. But your last page of the balance sheet shows an general fund unrestricted of a negative 321,000, which means that's at
That was the start. That was the start of year.
Herb, you're garbled.
That was the start of year. We started the year out with a negative 321 fund balance.
Yep. And you're showing the 1,000,005 as the current year's.
The current fund balance is 1.5 million to the good.
I'm love to sit down and talk about that at another time. I'm just trying to.
The 1.197 million is the fund balance to date. The start of year was negative 321,000. The fund balance for the year currently is 1.5 million. So the net is 1.197 million.
Okay, I just feel like there's an entry needing to be made between the due to, due froms to fill some buckets. So again, I'll wait to catch up with you on that.
Yep.
Thank you, Cheryl.
So Pam Smith has her hand on, but can I ask a question of our colleagues, Claudette?
Sure.
So did anyone in reading the balance sheet have that understanding?
No.
So that was not my understanding in reading this balance sheet. And so, and I think it's because I don't necessarily have a background in reading extensive balance sheets outside of this one, which I freely admit, right? But I did assume the relationship with the liability shown and the due to do from, I assumed it was the school, but I admit that that was an assumption on my part. So did anyone else, you know, so did anyone else in reading this?
I'm looking back.
Okay. Just because, you know, I think Cheryl often speaks and provides a reading of these documents, which would make sense because she is our elected treasurer, that she would have a deep understanding of this. And Herb also has a deep understanding of this, as he would in his role as town manager. And I think I am often left like hearing interpretations of work that is like ultimately, of a situation that is ultimately okay, right? Like in the grand scheme of things. So I think I want to start asking more questions about how each of us read these things. And so we can figure out, so we can audit ourselves a little bit. So that was not my reading I made, but I did make an assumption that the due to, due from situation was a result of the school, right? But maybe I shouldn't have done that. Mary has her hand up and then, yeah.
Go ahead, Mary.
Are you getting
And
this?
Pam, I know you're there, Pam. Hold on. We'll go to Mary and then Pam. Sorry.
Okay, is my audio quality okay? All right.
Yeah.
I understood about the current fund balance, but I find the balance sheets very difficult. You have to really look at it and think about it and, well, what did happen, you know, at the start of the year, what is happening now. I don't find them intuitive. I find them difficult. But if I study it enough, it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Pam, you had a comment?
Sorry, Pam, you're unmuted now. I muted you accidentally.
Pam Smith, 1445 New Boston Road. I was hoping Herb might be able to clarify something on the town administrative budget. Under Energy Committee, we have a budget of 1,500 and an actual of 18,347. So I'm wondering, what was that expense?
At the bulk of the expense for that, as I've reported in the past a couple times, is for the new EV charging station at Huntley Meadow. And there's a grant that is still owed us from the state that has not been received yet. So that's the bulk of that expense.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I would point out to Mary's, I would love for this information to be presented in a way different way. And I sent an email off to Herb, I guess, you know, exactly what, I'm looking more for like a dashboard type report, not, I don't know. I struggled to find an example but I am like Mary. I look it over and I can't quite make sense of it, and then I put it away, and then I look it over again and try to find some links and remember some previous conversations, but I don't find the method that is reported out in to be user-friendly at all.
Okay.
Are you just talking about the balance sheet, or are you talking about the monthly reports, or both?
Both. I think there can be probably a much more simplified way to report that information with links to dig deeper if we felt the need to. I would want the link. I would want to look at the data behind it, but as just a report, that's, and I know I'm probably reversing what I had said before.
Because this is the one that you liked.
I like, but I still find it cumbersome.
Okay, so
But anyway.
this is part of, so from being personal right now, this is part of my issue with the board, because I'm getting a lot of lack of clarity in terms of what you want versus what's helpful, what isn't. So what I've tried to do, at least with the monthly reports, is find the one that suits your needs the best, which is the one that I give you. The balance sheet, frankly, is what it is in terms of how Nemrick pumps stuff out. If there's you know, as a, for instance, if there's definitional stuff that I could find to put in there that could be sort of like the assumption page behind it,
Yeah.
that would be helpful. But in terms of the actual monthly report, so that I think can be worked on with it for the balance sheet. The monthly report, that's as much as it's your frustration, it's my frustration, because I want to be able to give stuff to you that you find meaningful, but I'm not getting a lot of clarity from the 5 of you.
Yeah, I hear that, and like maybe that's something we should think about for a future agenda. I mean, I opened, if I may, Claudette. So I mean, I opened it up to the group as just a moment of self-reflection, right? Because I shared your, I guess, analysis, so to speak, Herb, but I realized I did so after an assumption, not from the actual report itself, and that might be not a good way to go about it, right? So it was a moment for me that I wanted just to kind of share in the space. Rob has his hand up, and then Cheryl also has her hand up, Claudette.
Sorry, Rob, go ahead.
When we were looking at training resources that were available and the municipal accounting course was mentioned, more I think about it and look at the reports, I feel as if we could all use a course like that. To either that or spend some time deeply looking at what the options are for presenting and what kind of a graph, what kind of a chart would make that clear to us. But it's a lot of time and effort to go into just figuring that out too.
We also benefit from a town manager form of government too, I will say, right? So sorry, I don't know why I said that. I don't, Cheryl has her hand up.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
Cheryl, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself? I can't.
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm back. I'm going to stick my neck out here on a little bit, but I worked with Roberta for many years, as you know, and all of her transactions between funds of the town were handled through the due to, due froms, which is the traditional way of doing that. And I further substantiate that by the fact that there's a liability separately listed on the balance sheet under liabilities on page 2 for the school district taxes to be paid. So when we pay the school district, we give them cash, we debit the liability and credit cash. That's the transaction. That does not touch the due to, due from. So again, I believe in looking at these that there's a certain amount of work that needs to be done with journal entries to put money back into the designated funds from the FEMA payment that came back. So those dollars came back and we borrowed dollars from those designated funds through the due to, due from. So now we got to get those back over to those designated funds.
That was already done many months ago, which was reported on. And the general money that came in most recently paid off the line of credit. So everything has been paid back. Line of credit's been paid off. There's cash on hand. You know, in terms of your assets, you're looking at the balance sheet. It's a balance between the assets and the liabilities. You got cash on hand, other accounts receivable that are offsetting the accounts payable, including the $2.3 million. So all of that, you can see that what was taken out of the balance sheet was that 2.1 million. And then at the tail end of things, you had the start of the fund balance and the end, the current fund balance with the undesignated fund balance thereafter. So everything does match, frankly.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, comments while we look? I like Rob's idea. You know, it's going to continue to be a work in progress, hopefully until we get a finance director in the office, and hopefully that person can do some Great work.
One other suggestion is that you could afford yourself the opportunity of having Cynthia Stoddard as well as Bonnie Batchelder come in during a board meeting or as a special board meeting with the idea of doing a level of training for board members in terms of what NEMRIC can and cannot do with regard to reporting, and also what Bonnie Batchelder expects or sees as it relates to, just sort of educating how to read an audit, how to read a balance sheet. And I think you would find that fairly useful because I think they both can talk in lay terms that you would all understand. And then the other piece of that, which I've shared with you, is that Bonnie Batchelder, who actually volunteers in Barrytown, they went through a whole vetting process and they left NEMRIC and they went to a new accounting system, which I shared at least with a couple board members to look at. I shared the link to it. And so part of this discussion, going back to Claudette's question, maybe it is time to start thinking about a different software package for accounting that's a little bit more robust and has the more at your fingertip reports that you might be looking for in the process. Just a thought for to plant the seed potentially, or to water Pepper's seed, I guess.
Yes.
Sorry, I thought I had turned off my phone, and I had turned off my phone, but for some reason it started ringing and I was invited to join a survey on how President Trump is doing. So, sorry.
You're done
I was gonna completely get off the phone and take the get off the, anyway, never mind. Okay. We're actually up to our break time. Is that, so we will take 10 minutes. 7:53, we'll be back.
Yes.
Okay.
Pausing.
Resuming the select board meeting for June 25th. Our next item on the agenda is policy updates. And the first one is the fund balance policy, which, Mary, I'm going to be turning to you because you were the person who wanted to at least look at this policy, and I thought I remembered some email chatter when we were setting up the agenda that you were now okay with the current policy.
I looked it over a couple of times. The only thing I'm wondering about is section under procedure 3.3, where it says, as part of setting the town tax rate, the select board will review and discuss the undesignated fund balance. Just wondering whether we should change that to as part of discussing the budget, because we were trying to get away from sort of tying the, well, for one thing, using the undesignated fund to pay down the tax rate. We're trying to get away from that. So I'm wondering whether we should just shift that part of it so that if we are discussing it, it's during budget season.
I have a question.
Yes, Roger.
Is this policy in compliance with state statute? Right. So in other words, and I think there's a very vocal discussion when we were setting the tax rate that whether or not we needed voter authorization to make any of those decisions. This policy, as Mary said, hints at these things around the edges, but provides enough ambiguity where we might have, say, a 3-2 vote like we did last time. So Herb has his hand up, but that is my, that's my question. Maybe he'll answer it.
Go ahead, Herb.
I was a little baffled with the agenda item because I thought that it would be that there was a draft out there or one coming. So, and that this had been adopted as part of the master financial policy. So that's why this is the only thing that appears in there. I do remember, like Claudette, we had some past discussion, and I know for a fact that we cannot, the select board unilaterally cannot spend the undesignated fund balance without voter approval. So the way that you've been doing the tax rate setting process in the past has not been done accurately. You should still have the discussion about the undesignated fund balance in terms of setting the tax rate, which is kind of a precursor to having additional discussion during the budget process. I think where you would be better off is to have a separate designated fund established by the voters, like called an emergency reserve fund. And then for any undesignated fund balance that you have, you ask the voters in a separate article at town meeting, shall X portion of the undesignated fund balance be deposit, transferred to the emergency reserve. And then that's what establishes, that's where you carry out your policy in terms of how much percentage you want to have in reserve as a function of your total budget in case something happens. So there probably is some working, Roger, of this particular policy. And I think we recognized that as a subcommittee when we were working on this. We just haven't put a draft yet together. So I think more for tonight's discussion is kind of, would probably good for, say, me and Mary to go off and perhaps draft something for the larger board to consider, or if two members of the board want to do it, happy to have that happen. But I know Mary and I have worked on a couple things a couple times, so.
Mary, you had a question?
Yeah, just, I know that Herb has brought this up a couple of times, this idea about having the emergency reserve fund and the undesignated fund. And I'm just, that is one thing that I wanted to hear about from the rest of the board tonight. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you want to go in that direction? And if you guys do, I'd be happy to work with Herb to produce a draft. Do you think it makes sense? And also the undesignated fund part of it, I would think would be just a lot less money, proportionally to the emergency reserve fund. So, and maybe you need to see a draft before you could say yes or no to that.
So are you proposing possibly drafting? So what would be, so there's a suggestion that this needs to be revised. And then there's also a suggestion that to conceptualize an emergency designated fund, which sounds like separate work from this. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think if I understand what Herb has been talking about, just to shift away from having a very large undesignated fund to having a designated fund that is for emergencies, that's large, that would have the same type of percentage of setting aside that we've been using for our undesignated fund, and then just have a much smaller undesignated fund, which is a little bit of a just cash flow cushion, but it would be just a lot less money. So that's what I'm wondering about. Should we just leave it the way it is? Because I think there's already the possibility that an undesignated fund could cover emergency expenses. That seems to be why we have one. So do we want an extra designated fund for emergencies or not? It's kind of a, maybe it's a philosophical question, or is it just one too many designated funds?
Right. Well, I mean, to me, like if it's if there's a surplus, right, the money from a surplus, it seems like you may also decide as a board that that surplus should go towards an actual existing designated fund. You can say that needs to go to a particular social service, right? There's nothing that could stop us from doing that, right, Herb? So like say, if you want to potentially be committed to affordable housing, you could take a surplus fund and put it in that fund, right? So there may or may not actually be a philosophical conversation, but I know I'm straying from this as an agenda item, so I'll stop. But I think I understand the sort of the buckets, right?
Well, maybe it's just of making sure that the voters authorize what we want to spend money on and just how to do that. When you say a surplus, I would assume it means we, spent less than we budgeted for. So the question is, shouldn't the voters have a chance to vote on whether they'd just like to have that money back, like to have it, sort of returned to them, or would they like to have it used for some other purpose that they vote on? So that's the idea of it. The whole thing is a little confusing to me, but.
Herb?
There's a couple issues with your practice that plays into this. The board has been actually in the past setting a tax rate that actually purposely raised undesignated fund balance, which you cannot do. The voters authorize what you can spend at town meeting. You get a grand list, you do the simple division, and there you get your tax rate. So that's one way that is makes me very nervous about the way you've been doing stuff in the past. And then the other is that like last year, you vote to take a portion of the undesignated funds to go to saying buying down the tax rate, which is perfectly fine, but you have to have voter authorization to utilize the undesignated fund balance. So there's a couple different ways you can do, like I talked about, having an emergency reserve designated fund that the voters authorize, and then you ask them to transfer in some money if you have it from year to year. The other is or you appropriate new funds to go in it during the budget season, that's sort of the second part of that two-tier policy that you guys set up. The other is there's a couple different ways that you can ask voters to do stuff. So you might, and I would have to check with VLCT, but you might be able to not have an emergency reserve, but ask the voters if the select board has authority to take a certain portion of any undesignated fund and hold it for emergency reserve, so that as you get there, you've got it established, so that you can dip into it should you need to on an emergency. Because that's the whole thing is it's undesignated, so it's really, even though it's been authorized by the voters and you've set a tax rate and you've got some surplus, that it builds because of a surplus. Typically, when you have that situation, you have to go back to the voters to ask them how it can be spent.
So I still need a little clarification. So let's consider money that is in the undesignated fund not for emergencies. What would that be?
Same answer. If you want, for instance, Roger's affordable housing question, if affordable housing is a good thing, you already have an affordable housing fund, a designated fund, which you do, you can ask the voters and say any portion of whatever that undesignated fund is that you want to have transferred into the affordable housing fund. You have an article at town meeting that says, shall the voters authorize $50,000 of the undesignated fund to go to the affordable housing fund? Upon yes, there's a transfer out of the undesignated fund into that fund. So it's the same situation. The reserve fund, the emergency reserve, to me, is just a cleaner way of having the appropriate emergency reserve that you need to handle your stuff, and you can establish that percentage. So each year when you look at stuff, as your budget changes and you're saying it's say 15% of the last year's budget that you want to deal with how your budget grows or declines over time, you establish at the budget season what might or might not be the new appropriation you need to get to the specific percentage that you're looking for in the emergency reserve. So it's not a floating thing in the undesignated fund balance. It's an actual calculated stuff. There's an amount of money that stays in there. If you need a little bit more, you put it in. If you actually don't need any more, then you don't put anything. And then you've protected yourself in having that money for emergencies. As an emergency, right? And it's used. Right. It's still an act of the select board to use the money, so it's not like there's a second tier of approval that has to occur. Once it's been put in there, it still is the select board's action to utilize it.
Rob, did you have a question?
He has his hand. Yeah.
Yep. Would an emergency fund carry over if it wasn't used at the end of the year?
Yeah, all designated funds are designed for that purpose, so that if whatever is in a designated fund the purpose of the designated fund or reserve fund is allows it to carry over from fiscal year to fiscal year.
It doesn't, from a standpoint of how the money has to be accounted for or credited towards the next year's budget or whatever, is there a significant difference between the emergency, the concept of an emergency fund and an undesignated fund that didn't get spent?
Yeah, there's a huge difference in that an undesignated fund balance has no designation for its use. For a reserve fund, there's a specific use for it. And what I'm proposing is it's specifically for emergency reserve for when you need to bridge, say, 45 or 60 days of payroll because the world blew up. The undesignated fund basically sits there until it gets used for a specific designated purpose. That may be to account for a deficit year. It may be to dump into a new already designated fund, to create a new designated fund. But essentially the select board would make recommendation to or put articles out there for the voters to authorize. But the voters essentially get the say in where that money goes.
So can I bring us back? I would suggest that we add some clarifying statement in the fund policy that just says that this money will not, the undesignated fund, how it's, I'm trying to think of, I'm trying to get away from, or trying to get to the point that we will not use it to buy down the tax rate without voter approval.
That's right.
And then the other discussion about what we do to keep that undesignated fund in our 12 to 15% range. If it's in excess of the 15%, how we allocate those funds, I agree with Herb, that we discuss it at budget time and see, do we want to use it to bump up some of our existing funds, or do we want to have a brand new fund? But right now, I think we just need a clarifying statement in the policy that says it will not be used to buy down the tax rate without voter approval.
Agreed. That's awesome. Thanks for that.
That sound like just
Sounds like a good direction, and it sounds like not going in the direction of creating a emergency fund.
I think that's we'll decide on at budget time.
So it could be a future amendment or something, or we could talk about it more then.
We talk about it more then. We find out exactly what we have, number one, and how much of that would go someplace else, or stay in the undesignated fund in its entirety.
Would you want the clarifying statements then, or?
No, I think the policy needs to be updated with the clarifying statement.
People might be looking to buy the tax rate down, as has been customary, right, for what sounds like a generation.
So if I work with Herb to make a draft of that exact language and just bring it back?
That'd be great.
Okay.
The other thing I just want to point out the other thing I learned from watching another town's meetings is that using your undesignated fund to buy down your tax rate is actually hurting you in the long run because you're receiving less revenue.
Yes.
From your taxes. So it really doesn't make much fiscal sense. Even though there's an immediate sense of relief, it in the long run it probably hurts you more.
Yeah.
Roger, did you say somebody had their hand up?
Yes, we have Cheryl and then Linda Cook. So
go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay, hi. Just want to make sure that you all know that there's a great site called gfoa.org, and they have some available best practices to look at. So if you're...
It's in the policy, Cheryl. We know.
Referenced in the policy.
Okay. I haven't had a lot of time extra to look over what everything is in the packet, but if you all can, as board members, take a peek.
You had to sign it already. You signed this as part of the policies.
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you. Linda Cook has her hand up.
Go ahead, Linda.
The only The only question I have on that, I mean, you're saying buy down the tax rate. I look at it as you're giving the voters back because we asked for more money than we actually needed in our budget. So I would like to see the budgets tightened up more so that we can reduce the amount our budget is, and therefore we shouldn't be seeing these surpluses.
Good point. Okay.
Really?
Herb?
And just if you end up with a surpluses and transfer in, it can be less money that you raise for during the
For
budget
taxes
season
the next
for
year.
new designated funds, because you've already raised them, the taxpayers have already paid it, and the voters just need to authorize the transfer over. So it can actually, again, it can actually save you, and it actually helps to stabilize your tax rate rather than have some peaks and lulls with buying down, and all of a sudden, if you don't have it the following year, you got to make up what you just bought down.
So just to recap, Mary will work with Herb to put language together in a revised policy, and we will address the undesignated fund in great detail at budget season.
But you do want those simple corrections sooner,
Yes.
right? Okay,
Yes.
like the next meeting, which I think would be good.
Sounds great, Mary. Thank you.
Okay.
The next one is the tax collection policy. This really is, we won't even be looking at it, I don't believe, because I submitted a proposal or a draft to Herb. He made some revisions he hadn't completed them. I have not. And then he sent out the completed ones today. I have not had a chance to look at them.
You can table the item.
Yeah, I want to table the first read until the next meeting.
That makes sense.
I think that
Everyone
makes sense too. So I think it's a great start.
And that brings us to the policy of posting of the police standards. And Roger, you're on.
Yeah, so I can introduce this, and I've also had the benefit of speaking to Herb about this policy, and then also Claudia and I had a productive email exchange. So, which is to say that, so the purpose of this policy is to make information available online and easily accessible to the public in order to educate Norwich residents about law enforcement policies, practices, and procedures to increase awareness and community trust. This was very much in response to a lot of the questions that I have received, both as an individual member and that we saw via the listserv. We also had some folks come to a meeting, not the last meeting, but the meeting before, asking for these answers, to some answers about some specific policies. I appreciate the fact very much that we have a police department and a police chief who answered these questions very efficiently and with great clarity. But it also made me wonder that these are, because the police department in particular is governed by what I suspect are literally hundreds of policies and procedures, it may make some sense to have, to the extent possible, some of that available for public viewing, so folks don't necessarily have to ask. So anything that would be subject to the Vermont Public Records Act would be made available. So as some folks have remarked, it is purposely broad, right? So it asks for policies, practices, procedures, also materials, educational manuals, and that is a broad cachement, not because I'm necessarily interested in sort of digging up everything that the police department is governed by, but simply because I don't know what would qualify. So this, by having a broad request, it assigns the agency to the department to come forward with that. This is based off of a state law in California that was enacted, and so this was just adapted here. So by grounding it in the Vermont Public Records Act, it's just making it clear that anything that we would normally have access to with a request would simply just be already made available to us. I think if I were to amend anything in this policy, I would add to the authorities the statute that details the exemptions, because we wouldn't want anything that would compromise officer safety, and we certainly wouldn't want anything that police are exempted from many things in the Vermont Public Records Act. And so I might add the statute that specifically discusses that as a maybe for the second round, I might add that in. But I think otherwise this is pretty understood as written. And I think it is unique. It is to the police department as opposed to all departments because of the uniqueness of the number of policies and the lack of maybe public understanding about these policies. And then of course, without saying, to the particular cultural moment that we are in, right? That being said, I think this is actually a good practice. I also was thinking about the banner policy and how that wasn't necessarily posted immediately available. I think this could be a good practice for all departments at a future date. So let me know your questions. Chief Frank has her hand up, but Mary also has her hand up.
Yeah, we're gonna go with select board comments first. Mary, go ahead.
I think the idea always is, how do you establish trust? So in a moment of great self-doubt for our nation, including many police departments, I think in cities and venues not our own, there's a profound lack of trust, which is well-deserved. So to me, there's a balance between putting all the information out there and just this sense of building trust. So there's that. And then it's like, well, what are we really talking about here? Like, what volume of information, you know, would you want to highlight aspects that people really feel uncomfortable about? Will there need to be sort of a guide to what all these policies are? Is it already pretty coherent and centralized? I just have a lot of kind of questions about the practical aspects of just putting a large volume of information out there. And I hope I can see where, you know, if it will help public trust, I think that's great, but I want to know the practical aspects.
So I can address your question if it's appropriate to do so now.
Go ahead, Roger.
So, I mean, I think, as I said, the wide cachement, right? Because it's anything from policies and procedures to educational materials. The listing of all of that was not necessarily to seek an enumeration of literally everything, but it is to actually, it's in recognition that most members of the public would not necessarily know what to look for. Like if a department is governed by a policy versus a procedure, that's why you name it all out there. And I think it's organized. There's a couple examples that exist in California and Colorado and even in Vermont, where it's just like a listing of the policy with the link. But I think its organization would be up to the department. I think the intention and the background is made clear in this policy, and there's I think it also asks that by August that we begin to commence this process. It doesn't necessarily ask for a finality to this process, but I think, yes, you highlighted very much the policy's goals, which is transparency and trust, which I'm not saying doesn't necessarily exist, but I think it would only seek to reinforce more, because we are seeing lots of questions that are being asked by our public. So yes, does that answer your question? I'm not saying it has to convince you one way or another. I just want to make sure I answered your question.
My question?
Yes.
I think I would also like to hear from Chief Frank, just because she would know the volume of information involved and probably have an idea of how it could be organized to be helpful to the public.
Yeah, that would be totally like, that would be her department. As a department head, that would be her prerogative following the enactment of this policy, right? It doesn't, we don't stipulate what that would look like in our policy. To get into that procedural point of view would possibly be inappropriate, right?
Well, except that haven't you couched this as being extremely broad?
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do you wear your uniform, or, you know, just, I mean, are there just details that, I don't know, it just seems so broad. I'm a little confused.
Yeah, and I think at a future meeting I can adopt you some examples. But the only thing that would be exempted is anything that would compromise officer safety and anything that would be exempt under the Public Records Act, right? So yeah, that's it. That's all I have to say.
Rob, did you have a comment before I go to the chief? Okay, chief, you're on.
Chief Jennifer Frank, the Norwich, Vermont Police Department. I guess I'd like to start out by saying I'm a little disheartened because I would have preferred that the select board would have had a conversation with the police department before moving forward and trying to create an ordinance that would require the police department to engage in activity. I'll tell you, the Norwich Police Department prides itself in its community relations and especially in its transparency. We've been very transparent with the community, both in what we do, in our actions, in our policies, our procedures. What I will say is that we have no problem as we start to look through our process if people have questions of being able to provide some answers to what some of those policies look like. But the danger to the ordinance that was put into place is that unfortunately it not only puts the officers at risk, but also asks some things that would really create some issues. And I'll start to just walk through a couple of those. Some of those talk about,
Chief,
I'm sorry. If you,
what are you talking about? Are you talking about what you're saying in ordinance? I'm talking about this policy. Is that, I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing because I don't understand. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Yes, that you placed before us, this draft June 18, 2020, prepared by Roger Arnold.
Yes, this policy. Okay, great, thanks.
So again, continuing on, when we talk about, for example, the standards that are in place, those are not Norwich Police Department standards, those are Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council standards. So we would refer anybody who had a question regarding standards to the Police Academy, as those might change at differing times and we're not in control of those standards. I'd also argue that one of the questions was to place certain trainings or modules or manuals online, and we don't, also that's a copyright issue. We don't have access to those things nor the rights to do so. As for the policies, I'll speak to the fact that there are many policies that we would have no issues or concerns with. The person who actually proposed this, Select Board Member Arnold, has referred to Burlington Police Department. So Burlington Police Department's also a significantly larger city than us, and I would presume they probably have more policies than we do. I did try to reach out to Chief Morrison, but unfortunately she has a family issue, so she's on leave for a pretty extended period of time. As a result of that, I was able to speak to the deputy chief, and I did ask them about their policies. They have considerably more than we do, but you'll note that they have, I believe, 15 of them, or 16, excuse me, that are posted to their website. Things like interacting with persons with diminished capacities, victim witness assistance, fair and impartial policing, body-worn cameras, domestic violence by law enforcement employees, public information acts, similar to those types of activities. And again, I think really what it comes down to is that the Norwich Police Department doesn't have any concerns or issues with being able to share things that wouldn't potentially impact safety-related concerns. As we know through the Freedom of Information Act, we do already know that those are protected regardless of any policies that were going to be put into place one direction or another. But there are some other policies that are not necessarily safety related, but could play an impact in how we interact with folks. Without getting into the specifics of those, I'll try to broadly discuss those. When we have an engagement with somebody who might be in a domestic violence incident, who shares with us information, our policy provides a specific way that we would be able to get that information from the victim to be able to move forward with the investigation without necessarily revealing who the victim would be. That's not a safety issue, that's a protection issue to try to allow victims to be able to come forward without necessarily a fear of retaliation to them. That would be something that might not be exempt under the policy, and the danger to saying things like commencing on the effective date, we shall conspicuously post on their website all current standards, policies, practicing, operating procedures is overly broad and dangerous. I would prefer to have a conversation that says, hey, We're a small town police department. We care about each other. People would like to know some of these policies, and looking and saying, obviously the tactical ones we already know are exempt and wouldn't be on there. But here are some areas that we think people in the community would benefit from, to hear from. We'd be more than happy to work with folks to share those. But I have some pretty big concerns of creating this mandate that forces the agency to do something that I think potentially has more than just a safety risk. It changes some of the protections that we can put in place for citizens. I'll pause for a moment because I know that was probably a fairly lengthy response.
No, I think, sorry, may I respond, Claudette?
Sure.
No, I think that absolutely makes sense. I don't see why I can understand that it would be repetitive to create a link from the Vermont Criminal Justice Standards, which is available elsewhere, to your website. I don't think that, for those policies, it would be completely reasonable to even just make reference to that for these particular ones that, so I think I think, as I said, this is not dictating the terms of how you would interpret that policy. That would be the prerogative of your department. And I think I do appreciate that we share that there's a value in its ultimate intention, right? That, there is for a small town, if this has the ability to create transparency and make it online, that's a good thing. I didn't specifically reference Burlington. I reference a particular court case, the Doyle versus Burlington, which just establishes what exactly it says in the background that I wrote. But I think it's great too that we have that context from our largest city to see how they are governing and make available their policies. I think that was all that I wanted to say. I think I don't necessarily, if it's available from a Vermont Public Records Act, and if it's something that I could request and achieve, I don't necessarily understand why it wouldn't be otherwise made available to us, in the interest of our community, right? That's why it's really grounded in public records and not, looking to do something like modify a penal code or any kind of local criminal codes. It's really just saying, we have these, we know that we have these authorities. We're a town that really loves the Freedom of Information Act, right? Really loves that transparency. So why not make it as an assumption that already exists? And it is a particular cultural moment where I think you can agree any kind of transparency is important, right? You have again.
I'm gonna chirp in here.
Yeah.
Typically, we have policies that are written that are reviewed by another member of the select board before they go out to the board as a draft.
Right.
That didn't happen here.
Right.
So I would like that to happen. And I do think being quite explicit with what will not be on the, what is protected under the Freedom of Information Act is important to put out there. And I also think that the policy could include language to the point that, anything copyrighted or that comes down from the state will be linked but won't be posted, kind of.
Yeah, and I just want to speak in the form of an apology about that, because I did speak to Herb's office about he also, in his addendum, you see that kind of flow chart about how policies are made. And while it is an individual board member's prerogative to insist, as I did, to have this be a part of our conversation, Herb did express to me that policies, particularly ones that affect personnel, should have the benefit of a conversation. And so, that is just exactly as you said, Claudette. And so I totally hear that, right? And I apologize. One of the other things I have to do is an animal control ordinance. That's actually an ordinance, right? Not a policy. And that is something that you better believe has a lot of collaboration, particularly with Chief Frank's office, and I would probably be more of a coordinating role, if anything, because I know that is so intrinsic to every department in town affairs. So, but I do think, ultimately, and then I'll stop talking, that policies of agencies in our town are for us as policymakers to make. And that is something I hold to. So that being said, I am fine with this being a first reading and recognizing that the second reading needs to take on the process of more collaboration. So I'll say that.
People okay with that approach? And I would also like to see it passed by the chief for comment with the added clarity. I would just be wanting to know, and as well as Herb, we just want to know if a revision is something that could be accepted. And I do think that we need to put the policy, what's the point of having a policy if nobody can look it up or look at it? I do agree with that as well. And how can we hold anybody accountable to a policy if they don't know what it is and they have to make a request for it? So, Mary?
And then she cranked her hand up.
Wanted to kind of push back on the idea that everyone in town loves the Freedom of Information Act. That I think in some ways, I guess it's probably a different, maybe it's a personal thing. Like to me, more information doesn't always necessarily result in reassurance. Just having access to all the information in the world. And to some extent, the conversation seems to be coming out of the larger national discussion. And I think it also kind of relates to whether people feel like they're in control of their life, and do they trust their police department? I would really like this to be somehow reduced, but not in a way that prevents people from knowing the basic procedures and structures of the police department. But I just think as it is, I don't think I could support it. It's just too broad. It would need to be reworked in some way. Maybe a conversation with Chief Frank and get another select board member involved, but I'm just having severe doubt. So I'll just put it out there.
Yeah, I'm happy to work with the second select board member and coordinate with Herb's office. And as I said, I totally think we should add one of the authorities to be the exemptions, like the statute that governs exemptions of the Public Records Act. That's sort of implied in the policy, but that could be explicitly stated for sure.
And I would like to not have this as a first read.
Okay.
I would like this as just as an introduction and bring back the reworked or revised policy and look at that one as a first read.
Yes, and I just wanted, I've made it clear how I see revisions, but and so I'm happy to work with someone on that.
I'd be happy to work with you.
Okay, great. And then Chief Frank, I don't know if you have your hand up, so I want to acknowledge that, but I maybe if that's the way, if you see that as a way forward to not have an adoption and understand that a second member will join a revision and we'll send that and circulate that through Herb's office, which would presumably go to you for feedback.
I'd be interested certainly in working collaboratively with folks to talk about the best way to try and achieve what you're looking for. I, by nature, am an individual who believes that if you can accomplish something collaboratively, it's generally more effective. I guess I'd also say that I'm not sure necessarily why putting a policy into place is the best way to accomplish this. I think sometimes collaboratively people can work together and through a conversation, but I think that's part of a larger discussion that we'll have as this starts to go through.
Yes, and I am, and we are policymakers, so it would make sense that we go to policy as one of our tools for governing for our elected duties, right? But yeah, totally.
I think the key here that might be a bit of a sticking point of a difference of understanding is that the police department has what's called standard operating procedures. which is slightly different than policies. And although those names sometimes feel like they're interchangeable, they're often not. So for example, a standard operating procedure we have is our uniform standard operating procedure, which says you may not wear white socks. It tells you how long your hair can be, how long your fingernails can be, etc. So if somebody in a policy was to wear white socks, it would be a violation and something you could get written up for. If somebody was to wear white socks in a standard operating procedure, that's a general guidance for moving forward or making a determination. So I just think it's also important to understand the terminology that we're utilizing as well, because I think that has a potential to be a bit of a stumbling block.
Yeah, and then I will wrap up. And I think maybe that is one of the modes of collaboration, right? Because we're certainly not interested in your white socks or the uniform of our department, right? But we are interested in the things that actually govern our community policing and our but I also know that like Herb could be helpful for us too, because he often talks about procedure versus policy, and and I think you're totally right to demand clarity on that. And so I hear that. And, you know, I thought that I was assigning a lot of like what I'm calling agency to the department to enact this policy, but perhaps it is the exact opposite. And I hear that. So I think we can move on, Claudette.
Yep. So is the rest of the board okay with what we're going to do here and clear with what is going to happen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So thank you. Next, we'll have the town manager update. And Herb, we purposefully made this very brief for you. Didn't give you a lot of time.
I know, I saw the emails. I felt a little, anyway, I will be brief. So more just to identify the things in the packet. The most interesting one to me was when I was looking for something else, I ran across the 2006 document that apparently a select board in the past must have adopted on how to get policies going. Looks like a pretty good thing to just keep, get back into sync with stuff in terms of the flow chart. And just, I thought it was useful, especially the second page related to the request for policy consideration, because it gets into the need statement as well. And I think that in just talking about the policy that we did, I think that second page can be used to be really helpful in the introduction of a policy. I already talked about the Stantec letter earlier with regard to the Route 132 box culvert in reply to Ernie's questions. You've seen that we've received a number of grants and was just notifying you that way. I didn't know if you had received and had gotten it yet or wanted to have it, but I put in the packet because you had talked about the Planning Commission's implementation program from the town plan. So I threw that in this packet in case you didn't have it, or more as a reminder of what you wanted to do with regard to the town plan and its implementation, because I remember that being an agenda item.
Yeah, was that formally presented to you, or did you go fetch that? Because we haven't heard boo from the Planning Commission.
I fetched that, yeah. The regional regional concerns meeting, with regard to the redoing of the overpasses on I-91, it looks like we're focused on the July 22nd meeting. So I'm trying to get them to the V-Trans to do as a bridged version of their overview and solicitation of regional concerns as possible. So that, for a future agenda item, Claudette and Roger, we should have that on there for that.
Yep.
I have finished up the leadership training course that I took through the Kansas Transit Leadership Group. And just one of the things that stood out with some follow-up was a neat, and again, this seemed to be good with regard to potentially agendas or other discussions in terms of asking the powerful questions. I think it kind of gets at a lot of the stuff that Roger talks about when he talks about thicker discussions instead of the thinner ones. And it's kind of neat the way that they present this. So it was something that I obtained through the through the leadership program and just sharing it with you is I think it's something that it's just a nice little reference sheet, so to speak, to have. And then that's all that I had in my packet to go over, because next month will be the written thing on my report. So unless you have questions of me, that here I am.
Any questions from board members?
Oh, thanks, Herb.
I would like to know the status of the interview process for the finance director.
So we're in the process of scheduling the interviews. I haven't had a chance to get the interviews scheduled because of some dealing with other stuff, but we're in the middle of scheduling the interviews. But I have a team put together. I've tried to start some solicitation of questions from members. I've received some to set that all up, because I want to make sure that we ask uniform questions throughout. And then we'll go from there with the idea of getting somebody on as soon thereafter as possible. Honestly, I'm not sure this is the strongest pool of candidates, but there's always a person or two that interviews a lot better than what's on their sheet or on their resume. So if I had to guess, we may have to reopen this up again. But in the meantime, there are some that I think that are at least worth interviewing.
Cheryl has her hand up, Claudette.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
I'm just glad you asked the question. I've been waiting to hear something from Herb, and if you've sent something out, Herb, did I get that email, or is this something that's coming out?
It's probably something that's coming out, because I've been working with Miranda, even though she's been out of the office for a few days, to get back at getting things scheduled. It took a second to get everybody's response back too, from who they wanted to interview versus not.
I was one of them who was later. I will say that.
Okay, because I know we had a deadline for that, so I just was curious. I hadn't heard anything either, so appreciate the update.
Yep, thanks for the question.
There are no further questions from the board. We'll go to the Brown Schoolhouse Trail Bridge proposal. Herb, I'm gonna leave that intro to you.
Sure. Hopefully you all saw the email, because I did not want to put in the packet all the proposals for you. So instead we sent you a Dropbox of all the proposals that were submitted. I think there were 8. In your packet under number 9 is a general summary of the process that we went through with the review team. Basically, we advertised in a number of locations, the highest of which was the Vermont Bid Registry, as well as doing some direct solicitation to 14 contractors. We received 8 bids, qualified bids. One of them we had to, even though it was qualified, the way that they provided they're qualified to do it, but the way that they submitted their bid disqualified them. But basically we did, the review team included me, Larry Wiggins, Bree Swenson, Steve Flanders, and Doug Hardy. We had technical proposals and cost proposals that were submitted in separately sealed envelopes. We evaluated the technical proposals on their merit first without looking at the cost proposals. Individually, members did their reviews of the technical proposals, ranked them, and then when the review team met, we generally consolidated the technical proposals into an overall ranking. And the criteria that we rank them on are listed in the packet overview. When the team had met, there was a general consensus that ranked in order. It was the firms of Fabricant, then Daniels, Timber Homes, and then L&M. Once we ranked them, we opened up the cost proposals. After the review of the cost proposals, Nick Fabricant stayed at the top because he had the least, the lowest proposal that met the requirements. And so the team unanimously agreed to recommend as a preferred contractor to you folks that Nick Fabricant be the preferred consultant. for an amount not to exceed $75,700. And just the reminder that during last town meeting, the voters did authorize up to $80,000 for borrowing to offset the cost of this. We had hoped at the time that we would get a up to a $50,000 grant from a state source. We applied, did not get the grant, but there has been some private funding raised to help offset the $75,700. And the Trails Committee has also applied for a couple other smaller smaller grants that they haven't heard back from yet. So there still is the possibility of some additional offset besides just borrowing, but we would borrow the whole amount, at least the amount that for those amounts that we already know that have been donated, we wouldn't obviously borrow that, but generally we would borrow the amount that we could do right now. If we get any grants or what have you from that standpoint, that would just help to pay off the loan faster than whatever terms we deal with. So in your motion sheet, the motion is essentially to authorize me to move forward with Nick Fabricant for an amount not to exceed $75,700, and also authorize me to obtain some lending. Gee, I can't even talk tonight. Sorry. To authorize me to obtain some lending terms from area banks for your review and approval on in order to secure the overall funding for a loan, because you would have to approve that anyway. And I'm sure if I needed to, Cheryl has some contacts. She probably could help me in obtaining some terms for any solicitation effort of area banks.
Okay, so is anyone willing to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll do it. I move to authorize the town manager to negotiate and execute a contract with Nick Fabricant for the design build Brown Schoolhouse Trail Bridge project in an amount not to exceed $75,700, and to further authorize the town manager to obtain lending terms from area banks for the board's review and approval on securing the voter authorized funding for the project.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Any select board comments?
I know that the article warning was very clear that we would be spending up to $80,000, but I suppose in all of its introductions and all of its conversations, the $50,000 grant was very much a part of that conversation. And so I suppose, if anything, I just would like, I would like less of that to be a part. I would like that to be less a part of the public outreach in the future for these kinds of projects, is what I would say, right?
Yeah, so the way I would suggest in the future that you deal with that is just essentially shorten the article up that just said, shall the voters authorize up to $80,000 of borrowing, period.
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
thing.
exactly.
Okay, I got
because I feel like anything else is, yeah, anyway, I think we know why, yeah.
Yep.
Any other comment? I have a comment. I think this is a terrible time to look to obtain a loan. We have no idea what our August tax revenues are going to bring. We have no idea how the coronavirus or whatever. We know that the state and the nation are in a financial big hole. I think it is foolhardy at this point. I'm not saying it not, I mean, we have to, this was a voter approved appropriation, but it does not need to be done before we have some kind of understanding about what our tax revenue will be come August. So I would propose that we do not go forward with this bridge project, to the great dismay of the Trails Committee. And we wait until after we see what our revenue stream will be come August. We still will have school appropriations that are going to be due. So I just think it is a bad time right now to go and look to incur more debt. So having said all that, if there are no other board comments, and we can take this to a vote. Mary?
I vote yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Roger? Did we miss some public comment?
No. Doug did ask for the language of the article warning, which made me in turn look for the language of the article warning.
Yeah, it's not, but that's not privy to this discussion because it's already been agreed to. I mean,
Yeah.
it was approved by the voters.
Yes. So
I'm just saying delay.
So I'm voting yes, but I'm just explaining why I was distracted. With apologies.
And I am voting no. So that's 3-1. The next is, I did not expect the 132 road classification, which I personally would not even want the board to consider reclassifying the road, but that's neither here nor there. I'm going to go back to Herb, who had extensive information in the packet, so I don't want to, I really don't want you to go over. Plus, a lot of that material was really of not much use because they are two completely different roads. Church Street 10A versus 132.
Yep.
I'll start this off then. The town manager of Thetford sent Herb an email that he's forwarded to us asking us to consider being one of the 4-town pact to petition the state to change the status of 132 from a class 2 road to a class 1 road, town road. And the argument being that then the towns that participated would receive a little bit more funding from the state to maintain the road. Herb's comment back to the Thetford town manager was that the road would probably need, I'm paraphrasing, would need probably some significant work to bring it up to the classification and the requirements of a class 1 highway. And I did not see anything in recent emails that said anything different than that. You can please correct me if I'm wrong, Herb.
Nope, good paraphrase.
So my bias is that no, I personally don't even want to consider it. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. It would take a lot of time, effort, and energy, both to find out how the road is deficient, what it would cost us to keep it up, the maintenance, the blah blah, and there would need to be 4 towns that would agree to it. And unless we hear that word from the other, I don't even know if Thetford really has gone any further with this. But I can't, I struggle with Stratford approving a change in designation considering how windy their section of 132 is and narrow. So, Mary.
I completely agree with you, Claudette. Also, the increase in state aid would be $20,000, which doesn't seem like much. And I think it's always been kind of a puzzle why the state doesn't maintain that road. It's a state road. So somehow it got pushed onto the towns. And I don't especially appreciate that. So I'd say no, I don't want to be part of the 4-town pact in this case.
Any other comments by the board?
I think the rationale behind their thinking, which, you know, to be fair, they may have wished to come to speak to it, is I think they're looking to seek to improve its classification so that we would, in theory, qualify for more state highway aid, but we would fundamentally like still be a town road. So I think that is their logic, and I wanted to center what their thinking was behind it. But I'm so uncertain because they've tried lots of different things with their portion of Route 132 for many years. And while I want to be helpful, I am very happy with my portion of Route 132. So I don't see that we need to take any action right now.
Do you agree, Rob?
Yeah.
Okay, then we can not go further with any of that discussion. The next is the fire department request to use designated funds. And this information was in our packet. So is there someone willing to make a motion?
Yes, I'll do it. I move to authorize the expenditure not to exceed $8,000 from the Norwich Fire Department Equipment Designated Fund as outlined in the Fire Chief's June 2nd, 2020 correspondence to the Select Board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Any board discussion?
Seems like routine replacement of protective gear. If I'm right, maybe the fire chief would like to confirm that.
He's here.
Yes, good morning, good morning. Long day. Good evening, everybody. Yes, it is regular, Mary. You know, it's stipulated in the capital plan that I sent you, stipulating line 13. We need to start to really focus on replacing a lot of our old PPE, and this is PPE not for COVID, this is PPE for structural firefighting, which is our kind of regular wear when we're out on the streets doing what we do. We have some stuff that's quite old now and definitely needs to be replaced, so it is a regular replacement.
Any other board comments? Herb, do you have the status of the fund? I should go back because it was just, what's in that fund? What's the fund balance right now? Do you know?
I can tell you that.
Okay.
The fund balance right now is $107,617.38.
Any further discussion then? We'll go to a vote. Okay. How do you vote, Mary?
I vote yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
And I'm a yes.
Thank you.
Yep. The next is I need to convene the select board, or what's the word I'm looking for? Recess the select board and convene the liquor control board. Is someone willing to make that?
Yeah, I move to recess the select board meeting and convene as the Norwich Liquor Commission.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so we are now sitting as the.
We have to vote. You have to vote.
Sorry, how do you vote? Mary?
Yeah. Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
And Brochu's a yes. So when I saw these, I must say that I reached out to her, but to say, what? Why? And he submitted in the packet that there was an extension that had been granted by the state to for renewals of licenses. I don't know, and that some of them were late getting to his, or there wasn't a lot of lead time provided to the town manager by the town clerk. So that's why they were added to our agenda, and I hate last minute things that are added that we don't know about. So I just want to point that out.
Guilty.
Is it true they're all on there in the motion sheet? They're 5. Was the last minute one the Norwich Wine and Spirits?
They were all last minute. The last second one was the Peters for the Norwich Wine and Spirits.
But they did make it onto the motion sheet, so that part's all straight, right?
They're all the ones that need to be approved are on the motion sheet.
Okay, thank you.
We had discussed back in the spring that when we review these liquor license applications that we would allow enough time for some investigation as to whether or not there had been complaints filed with the state liquor control board or that the police had responded to, and I don't know, I doubt that was able to happen.
I did speak with Bonnie about, from her end, she basically responded that they would not be allowed to have a license if there was anything from their standpoint that came from the Liquor Commission to deal with it. Obviously, I can't answer from the PD stuff because I haven't had a chance to deal with a PD, but if there's anything that would, the chief probably would know off the top of her head, if there was anything that would be consequential, that would be a recommendation or a suggestion that maybe they shouldn't be given their liquor license.
So Chief Frank has her hand up, Claudette.
Yes, go ahead, Chief.
I was following along with your conversation there. At the time that I was asked, there were only 3 businesses that I was asked for information on. It was for Carpenter and Maine, Norwich Wine and Spirits, and Blue Sparrow Kitchen. For those, I did speak with Liquor Control and I did check our records. I don't know, given now that there are more, is it appropriate for me to provide you my results, or would you like me to wait now that there are additional businesses?
Do you think that what the information that you have would potentially change our approval?
No, I do not believe so. None of them had concerns with the Liquor Commission. There was one business where the police department was called because there was an intoxicated male who had received alcohol after his level of intoxication. That was dealt with, and it was only one individual within the last year.
Okay. And that didn't, that wasn't flagged on the state liquor control?
No, it was not, because it was handled internally within the town through a police department response and did not necessitate liquor response.
Okay. So as far as I'm concerned, I think we can move ahead with these then. Anybody object to that approach?
Nope.
No.
Okay, so let's start with who's got their reading voice on. Who wants to make the first motion? And actually, we can probably bundle them all together.
Yeah, it's designed that way in the motion.
Mary, are you bundling? Are you reading for us?
I'm trying to think how to bundle. Yeah. Oh, let's see. How should I bundle this?
Well, it's all bundled on the motion sheet.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I move to approve liquor license applications as follows, and to authorize the town manager to sign on behalf of the select board due to COVID-19.
I think you have to read the individual establishment.
The
Okay.
motion is the whole thing. Yep.
Oh, excuse me?
The motion is inclusive of the 1 through 5 items. Yep.
Well, it said, yes, because it said liquor license applications as follows. I mean, you could say 1 through 5.
No, I think you have to read them all.
Okay, I'll read them all. Number 1, outside consumption permit for, I do not have French, L'Elephant. Thank you. LLC DBA Carpenter Maine Restaurant. 2 third-class restaurant bar license to sell spirituous liquors. Say again.
For L'Enfant Vert.
Thank you. LLC DBA Carpenter Maine Restaurant. 3 first-class restaurant bar license to sell malt and vinous beverages for
L'Enfant Vert.
LLC, DBA Carpenter Main Restaurant for first-class restaurant bar license to sell malt and Guinness beverages for Blue Sparrow Kitchen. Company, DBA Blue Sparrow Kitchen, and lastly, second-class liquor license to sell malt and Guinness beverages for PLR Enterprises, Inc., DBA Norwich Wine and Spirits.
Excellent job. Is there a second?
Yeah. Second.
Moved by Mary, seconded by Rob. Any board discussion?
No.
Okay, we'll go to a vote. Mary?
Yes.
Rob?
May we?
Roger?
Yes.
And Brochu's a yes as well. So is there a motion to close the Norwich Liquor Commission session and reconvene the select board?
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mary, seconded by Rob. We are now back as the Norwich Select Board at 9.
Oh, we have to vote.
Oh, gosh, it's the second time I've done that. Mary, how do you vote?
Yes. I vote yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Brochu's a yes. So reconvening as the Norwich Select Board at 9:06. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
I was going to say, nobody wants to adjourn? Motion made by Rob, seconded by Roger. Mary, how do you vote?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Brochu's a yes. And I want to thank very much Chief for giving us all that information, and to everybody else who participated tonight, Herb Durfee and Miranda for getting all this packet stuff together.
Can I say one thing, Madam Chair? Because he's still on, Doug Wilberding, you got to get yourself, you got to go take the oath with Bonnie as soon as you can for the lister position.
Yeah, I emailed her, and I think I sent you a note in the chat as well.
Okay.
Her note. So depending on what's happening with her availability with her husband, happy to do it anytime next week, whatever works for her.
Okay.
But thanks for the reminder.
Assistant?
Pardon me?
Can Judy do it as the assistant?
She should be able to, but there may be a jurisdictional thing there.
Yeah, okay. All right, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.